Welcome everybody. I'm Danielle Roessle. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and I'm an instructor through the National Career Development Association. I share my credentials because I'm talking about inner child work today with you this evening. And my credentials have led me to explore inner child work in depth. The way I'm going to do our presentation this evening is I'm going to start with an experiential exercise. From there, I'll use that experiential exercise and explain the concepts behind inner child work, because once you've had the experience, it's easier to understand what I'll be sharing with you. I'll also be sharing a brief history of inner child work throughout my presentation, and then I'll wrap up with questions. So just to share a little bit of information, Mike, who did such an incredible job this evening, we could tell he's a researcher. And I'm so grateful for the researchers in the world. They're so important. For me, I'm an experiential learner. So when I present to you this evening, I'm going to be presenting in an experiential way. And it's because it's the way that I learn the world. So for the learners who love reading or visual, my apologies, because this might not broach how you might understand inner child worker psychology, because as I understand, there are a lot of psychologists in the audience this evening. But hopefully this will give you a little bit of a taste of what it is, so that when you walk away this evening, you have some tools to connect with your inner child. So the way that I want to start is by having you think back to a story from your childhood that we might describe as uncomfortable, painful, or disturbing. On a scale of 0 to 10, 0 meaning not disturbing at all, to 10 being completely disturbing, I want you to pick somewhere in the range of a 2 to 3. So meaning it's not going to re-traumatize you by visiting this memory. It's just something to use for the sake of this exercise this evening. The example I'm going to share with you that I use when I practice this exercise was a time when I was maybe 4 or 5 years old in preschool. And we were having snack time with our class and teachers. And I went to get seconds because I had seen some of my classmates get seconds, and they literally just walked up to the table and grabbed food. So I went to do the same, and my teacher swatted my hand, and I was upset. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, she doesn't like me. And I remember feeling embarrassed, ashamed, and sad. And then I ended up behaving by retreating. I almost wanted to go to the bathroom and cry, but I just kind of went along with my day, but walked around with that sadness. And the belief, this is one of many, events that have happened to me, but the belief that I had carried with myself for years was that I wasn't worthy and that people didn't like me. So that's my example. And like I said, this was not a traumatizing event. This was just a level 2 or 3 in the scheme of things. So for you, when I have you do this exercise, just pick something that's a 2 to 3 on a scale of 10, 10 being most disturbing. So I'm going to have you put your hand on your heart and your stomach, and I'm going to have you close your eyes. And remember that everybody here is doing this exercise, so you're not alone. There's nobody on the screen watching you. So no need to feel embarrassed. And just take a deep breath in and out. And imagine a beam of light strengthening your mind. Strong mind. And breathe in and out and let that beam of light from above go through your throat and let it strengthen your voice. Strong voice. And take another deep breath in and out. And imagine that light trickling through your shoulders and your chest. And let it strengthen your heart. Strong heart. And breathe in and out. And let that light go through your stomach and let it strengthen your intuition. Strong intuition. And breathe in and out and let that light go through every cell of your body. Let it strengthen your body. Strong body. And in this light, you are safe to explore and be curious. And I want you now to recall that incident from childhood. And we're being curious about it in our safety and security. And now I just want you to think back to what had happened. Who was there? What did you see, smell, sense? And what was said? Or what actions had happened? And how did you interpret that incident? What did you think? And in turn, how did you feel? Were you sad, angry, lonely, disconnected, embarrassed, ashamed, or something else? And because of that incident, how did you react? Maybe you shied away and retreated, or you lashed out of anger. Or maybe you cried. And now I want you to imagine your older, wiser self coming and talking to that child and being deeply curious about that child. And before we speak to this child, if you can, show an open heart to this child without any judgments, opinions, or shoulds. We have enough judgments, opinions, and shoulds in the world. We don't want to put another layer of that onto this child. And I just want you to start being curious and have a conversation with this child and ask them what happened. And listen to how they respond. And ask them how they are feeling about what happened. And I want you now to ask that child, what do they need? If they could have anything right now, what do they need? Perhaps it's a hug. Perhaps it's someone telling them that everything's going to be okay. Perhaps it's words of support such as, you're worthy, I've got you, I love you, or you've got this. And notice what happens to that young child when you give them the support that they need. Does anything shift with that child? Perhaps they start feeling a little lighter or feeling a little bit better because they're getting the support and the love they need from you. And ask the child if there's anything else they would like to share with you. And listen with an open heart. And I want you now to tell that child, your younger self, that they are safe, that they have a light surrounding them, connecting them with a higher wisdom, and that while you will be leaving them, you are always connected to them. And now you find yourself in your chair, connected to your light and your wisdom, breathing in that light that strengthens your mind, your voice, your heart, your intuition, your body, and illuminates the path ahead. And as you connect with your light, ask the wisdom of your higher self, what would it like you to know? The answer might come in the form of a picture or words, and trust whatever comes. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. Roll your shoulders back. So I just want to check in with the audience. Did anybody have any interesting insights or anything happen for them when they went back that they cared to share? Yes.
I can see how this is useful for changing your internal dialogue about these things. Saying, like you say to yourself, oh, I was excluded because I wasn't worthy, and then you're changing that message to yourself.
Yes, it is good for changing that internal dialogue. Thank you for sharing. Is there anybody else? Okay. Well, yes.
I discovered that I was a very happy child. I had to dig deep for somebody that was a 2 or 3. It's okay. All your guidance, I feel like I can actually draw on it more for my present self.
That's
now as opposed to back then. So I feel lucky, but I feel like you've given me tools for now and beyond.
wonderful, wonderful. And then that was the person who you were meant to visit here and now. And what I mean by that is inner child work is really the idea of visiting the part of yourself, your psyche, that needs some visiting. And what we've learned in modern psychology is what happens when we have maybe a functional behavior, because we can do inner child work and revisit happy memories. I do it all the time with my clients to find out what behaviors function well in their lives and what serves them. But when we have a dysfunctional behavior, meaning when we go off into the world and we retreat, or we yell at our partners, or we maybe, in the more extreme cases, we hit or we punish somebody. Typically, it's because when we look back, we had a belief about ourselves that we carried into the world, and that behavior was a way to protect ourselves. So I want to break this down even further. So what I mean by this is, when we know children are observing the world around them, just like I had you in this visualization exercise, what happens is an event happens to them. The event, you could put a judgment whether it's good or bad, but in all reality, it's probably neutral. What happens is, though, the child has an experience, meaning they see something, they have an interpretation of it, and that interpretation then causes them to have thoughts. Those thoughts then in turn causes feelings or changes the emotional state. And because of those thoughts and feelings, the person reacts. And in the case of, dysfunctional behaviors, typically what we're seeing is the flight, the fight, or the freeze response. So let's think about that child you just revisited. If you were treated, that's the flight. If you were the one who lashed out at somebody, that was the fight. And if you did nothing, that was the freeze. Does this all make sense? Okay. So going back to that child, when we went and visited them, what we were doing is what Carl Jung called bringing the subconscious conscious. And Carl Jung, who was a contemporary of Sigmund Freud in the early 1900s, what he realized was that when we were working with individuals in a psychiatric setting, what would happen is they had feelings, thoughts, and behaviors. They formed beliefs about themselves, and the idea was that we wanted to help bring those subconscious thoughts conscious. And the idea was that we were forming what he called this idea of individuation. It's the idea of helping reshape those thoughts to more healthy thoughts to help bring the person to be more whole. So those thoughts that aren't serving them, change them. Then it changes the feelings and the behaviors. I'm doing an overly simplistic description of this, but I'm bringing it up because it's so important to know when we're, doing inner child work, why we're visiting the child, why we're trying to find out what their experience of the world was, because the idea is that we're trying to really get to the core of what were those thoughts and beliefs, and then how do we shift them to something more positive that serves that person. So when I was taking you through the exercise, the other thing that I had you do was bring your adult self in to support that child. And this concept comes from another psychologist. I'm going to butcher her name. Her name is Lucia Cappuccioni. She was a psychologist very big in the 80s, and she came up with this concept of reparenting the inner child. So what she meant by this, and what I just had you do, was we know that the child had brought a false belief about themselves into the world and are reacting about it. So for me, my belief for years, and I'm still working to shift it, is my unworthiness, which, like I said, I'm working to shift, and the fact that I thought people didn't like me for years. So when we have parents and we have caretakers, sometimes they don't necessarily know how to parent us. When we think about our dysfunctional behaviors, each of us have them. Where do we learn them from? Mostly the role models that are around us, the people that are core influencers in our life. So in my case of the teacher, I don't think she meant to bat me away, but my interpretation of it was that she didn't like me. So when I had you have your older, wiser self come into your visualization and start talking to the child and giving words of love, support, care, without judgment, without shoulds, without opinions, we started noticing, perhaps, I hope you noticed, that your inner child started to lift up and feel more confident. So the idea of reparenting is almost giving you the self-love and self-support you needed that you didn't get when you were a child in that memory. Now, sometimes when we do inner child work, and when I do this with clients, they might bring up a memory of themselves in college, or themselves 5-6 years ago in a job that they didn't like. Inner child work really is just referring to any part of your psyche that hasn't had a resolution, that's brought a belief about themselves forward into the world that needs to shift because it's not serving them. So, I think the last piece that I want to bring up for you today is that when you think about the part of yourself that might not have a perfect behavior or might feel some unresolved, past, there's always ways to revisit and go back and do some healing with that child. Now, I did a visualization and a mix of somatic exercises, but you can do this in many different ways. That's why we have dance therapy. That's why we have drama therapy, or called psychodrama. That's why we have art therapy. They're just different ways of going back and meeting that part of your psyche or yourself that just needs some love and some revisiting. And when we can give ourselves that self-love and self-compassion and start working on that healing, that's the love that we can move forward and give to other people as well. So know that the work you did here today, even in this short amount of time, saying kind words to yourself without judgment, without opinion, without shoulds, is the love that you should be giving yourself more and more, and to others, because we know that when we have those things, it doesn't really help us. It makes us smaller. So I hope that when you walk away from tonight, these few little tools can help you move forward, heal that inner child, so you can bring more love into the world. Thank you. So we have about 5 minutes for questions. Yes.
For me, I have a lot of memories when I was a child with my two brothers. But the thing is that when you grow up, you learn from your brothers, not from your mom, not from your dad. Because the thing is, when you grow from the ages who you are, and people know you as a person, and since you were a baby and they come at your house, they know you, like, oh my God, this is me, and stuff like that. So I think that reminds me of my childhood when I was very young, baby and a boy, and I'm glad that I have two brothers with me, and I really learned about how life is. Like when you are from 16 turning to 17 or something like that, sometimes you feel sometimes people don't think they're learning the right thing. But the thing that is, I closed my eyes and I said, I'm learning things, like bad behaviors, stuff like that. But the thing is, I felt years, I felt miserable, but now it's a different world for me to be in this unreal, wonderful neighborhood with people, and just pass by to say hello or hang out with them, something like that. Because I moved from Palestine and we had a lot of issues, and it's just, this is how I learned how to be very nice to my neighborhood and check things around and be with people all the time.
Thank you,
And
Nader.
and I'm very happy, actually.
Thank you, Nader.
Welcome.
I'm happy you're here. And we have about a minute left for any other questions. Sure.
My dad is 90, and he's finding now that he's having very vivid memories of his childhood coming up that are troubling, but they're coming to him in his sleep. So is there, is this kind of therapy useful like in his daily life, he handles it fine.
Mm-hmm.
But then we'll have these horrible dreams that are real memories. They're not fantastical versions of what happened. And he cannot resolve things. His mother, he's 90, you can imagine.
Sure.
No.
It's interesting. So when I was working towards my LCSW, licensed clinical social worker, I was actually being trained in dream work. And the idea is that when you would have a dream, similar to talking to that child, you might look at the dream and be curious and talk to it and look for theme. Like, I'm not a trained dream worker, so please understand. But the idea is that you could actually use the dream as inquiry, just like we use the child for inquiry. So dreams are really powerful. And they're a really incredible tool to tap the subconscious, because when we're dreaming, it's our subconscious bringing up things to us. So resolved or unresolved. Yeah, a great question. Anybody else?
Danielle, I'll just say that I think this presentation really brings to my mind, I think we could have a whole other talk around the topic of trauma.
Yeah.
Because trauma is such a big word in our workplace, in our society, in our culture. And how do we as individuals and as a society process trauma? And how, trigger moments.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a real need in our society right now to understand the role of trauma,
Yeah.
but also how are we as adults, which is what we are, how do we respond to that as citizens, as neighbors, as people in the workplace? So I'm curious, I'm hungry to know more.
Yeah.
That's all I'll say.
I'm with you. I wish we did talk a lot more about it. I know one of the things I've been doing is publishing about trauma in the work. I work as a career counselor, and I talk a lot about trauma in the workplace and how trauma shows up in the workplace. And we don't talk about it because when we're typically reacting to something, we're not reacting to an event here and now, we're reacting to an event that happened decades ago. So a bad boss is just mirroring some type of experience we had former. And I think the thing about trauma is, like today we talked about trauma as in the little t, so nothing big. But we could see like little things that could happen to us can add up and amplify. But then there are those traumas that, getting hit by a bus or, rape, those type of things where they just have lasting impacts that even the work we did today the event would be so much, couldn't really go there. And that's why there are other therapies out there. I know Betsy was sharing, she's trained in EMDR. I've done a basic certification in EMDR. Sometimes there's just things that we need to process in our bodies that we don't even want to think back to and just release and desensitize. But I think there's so many ways, because right now what I tend to focus on is how can the individual work on their own mini traumas and so forth. But I think as a society, there definitely could be some need to understand how to support people who have gone through little to big traumas, for sure. Yes, Betsy.
Danielle, I just wanted to really compliment you on an incredible presentation. And the points you brought up, which also speak to your question, which is whatever experience we are having, if we can bring forgiveness, compassion, and loving care. So when your father thinks about these dreams, if he can hold it in kind of a vessel of caring. And the way you put it was so great. And of course, I'm very much a believer in experiential therapy. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else? Well, thank you.